Let me ask you about your economic opportunity zones. This is something, of course, that would lower the tax and try to create incentives to bring in investment into rural and urban communities. Talk to me about where we're at with this process.
Well, we're moving forward. The good news is all the governors of the country have already established their opportunity zones in each state. The goal is to bring private sector dollars to harmonize with government dollars to make sure that those communities that have not seen the type of economic recovery that the rest of the country has seen has a chance to be hopeful, because new dollars, private sector dollars, are coming in to challenge some of the poverty that's been too persistent in too many areas. So I'm excited about it because I grew up in those communities, raised in a single parent household, so I understand the potential that we find in some of those challenging communities. And the good news from my perspective is having a chance to excavate that potential through economic development.
You know, so much of what we talk about here on Bloomberg is trying to get those public-private partnerships, trying to get the type of the investment into many of these communities. This is a Jack Kempian type of policy that has been espoused for quite some time. But let me get your response to what Democrats and progressives who say, well, you're just moving and reshifting some of these zones around. What's the response to that criticism?
Well, two things. I'll take a step back first and address the Jack Kemp approach. Jack Kemp created the enterprise zones because he wanted government to do more in private sector in those communities that needed help. Unfortunately, that fell a little short, so the goal was to make up the difference through the private sector engagement. My legislation was co-sponsored by Senator Peters, Senator Booker, Senator Bennett, all Democrats. We had a bipartisan coalition supporting the legislation. So the good news from my perspective is the mayors, consistently Democrats, are all excited about this. The governors, a lot of them of whom are Republicans, excited about it. This is not a partisan piece of legislation. This is an American piece of legislation focusing on those folks who need it the most. This is not shifting resources. There are $2 trillion sitting on the sidelines, capital gains that have gone nowhere because there's just been too many hurdles to reinvest in some of the most powerful and high potential communities. This lowers that burden, and we'll see a surge of opportunities in distressed communities.
And I think it's interesting, particularly with capital gains, because, you know, when you talk about just how polarized this country has become, but then you take a look at some of the challenges facing rural America as well as urban communities, things like infrastructure, telecommunication, internet investment. How does this type of legislation help all of these communities that, you know, are very different in terms of politics, but facing some of the same challenges?
That's a really good question, Kevin. I was in Iowa with Governor Reynolds over the last weekend, and one of the things that we tried to focus on, along with Joni Ernst, was focusing on rural poverty. There are some industries that have a lot of success in the rural areas, agriculture being one of the best ones. So when we focus attention on providing the infrastructure in those areas that desperately need it, we're actually focusing on a long-term positive return on the invested dollar when we do that. So it is easy for us to overlook some communities. The good news is my governor, Henry McMaster in South Carolina, and the governor of Iowa, they're working hard to make sure that we don't forget the rural parts of our communities that are experiencing high unemployment rates as well as high poverty rates, which means lower levels of hope. We need to make that different, and we can, and the opportunity zones have done so. So if you think about new infrastructure, whether it's broadband, whether it's the tangible infrastructure coming into those communities, making them more attractive for invested dollars, this is one of the ways that we do that.
The president touting that 4.1 second quarter GDP growth earlier today. There's been a lot of talk about trade recently. You've had some criticisms of the president with regards to trade policy. Where are you at in terms of how the president has left things this week with the European Union following that meeting with Mr. Juncker?
Well, the one word that comes to mind is I can finally exhale just a little bit. I'll be honest with you. We've been holding our breath in a lot of parts of the country, hoping for something good to happen. Yesterday, last 2 days, we've seen some reasons to be positive and optimistic about avoiding a trade war with the EU. I'm not sure how close we're going to get to that zero barrier. I'm not sure that everyone wants us to get there. But the fact of the matter is, both sides taking a step back allows folks like me to exhale. As a free trader myself, I love to think that we can find a way to move more of our products and resources out of this country into markets without barriers, because we've done the same for the rest of the world here at home. So our consumers have benefited. We believe that their consumers can benefit from fewer barriers for our products and services to come into their markets.
We've seen that with Europe. What about with China? Where are you at in terms of where trade relations are with China?
Yeah, when you think about near peer competition, Secretary Mattis said it well, that China has become one of the two largest threats to the United States. The reason why they have become so is because they've been able to steal our IP, our intellectual property. So one of the things that we're looking for is to set up headwinds or to create hurdles for the Chinese to continue to force our companies or to compel our companies to share with them trade secrets. One of the ways that we're doing that is through CFIUS, which I think is a great, CFIUS is a legislation, if you're familiar with it. Another way that we do that is by entering into long, strong trade negotiations to make sure as they send more than $500 billion worth of products to our country that they understand and appreciate the necessity of having integrity in the process. The president is trying to reset those negotiations.